And my little monkey is washing the floors at my mother-in-law's house, laughed my husband at the corporate party. But he had no idea what surprise awaited him. Today, the Lighthouse restaurant was closed for a special event. It was hosting the 10th anniversary celebration of a commercial bank. Loud music was playing, and the employees were finally able to relax and have fun at the company's expense. Many brought their wives and husbands, but there were also those who took the opportunity to take a break from their significant other. "I don't go anywhere with my Jessica," said a tipsy man, swaying slightly. "My little monkey is only good for washing my mother's floors," and then he laughed heartily. "Right," William supported his colleague. "That's what women are for, to do the housework. Does your wife mind that you're here having fun alone?" "She wouldn't dare," William said confidently. "Jessica is right here." He stuck his arm forward and clenched his fist. "As the head of the family, it's up to me to decide who rests and who works." The women standing nearby exchanged meaningful glances, their lips pressed in disapproval. William had spent the entire evening trying to assert himself at the expense of his wife, who was at home and unable to defend herself. Some people found it repulsive, but among his colleagues, there were those who supported this mindset. A small group of similarly tipsy people gathered around the inebriated accountant, listening to him with interest. William felt on top of the world. Usually quiet and working alone, today he enjoyed the heightened attention, which flattered him. He eagerly eyed the well-dressed women, imagining who he could have fun with. William didn't have a mistress yet, but he wasn't opposed to having one, seeing nothing wrong with it. "What's going on?" he muttered loudly as he saw another incoming call from his wife. "I told her not to bother me. Is it really that hard to understand I'm relaxing?" It was already past midnight. Jessica, who was really with her husband's mother, started to worry. William had promised to return by 11 at the latest, but he had been gone for a long time, and she couldn't sleep because of it. Fortunately, her mother-in-law was already asleep, or she would have worried too. Emily Morrison was seriously ill, so her daughter-in-law had to take care of the house and the sick woman. William didn't rush to help, justifying it by saying he was exhausted from work. "Just pick up the phone." Jessica, in another part of the city, said as she had been waiting for him to come home for hours. She had lost count of how many times she had called, and in her frustration, she threw the phone on the table. It landed next to the report she had prepared for her husband. The thing was, Jessica was an economist by training, and a very talented one at that. Even during her student years, many professors predicted a successful future and rapid career growth for her, but the girl chose love. When his mother fell ill, William asked her to quit her job to care for her, and Jessica agreed because she loved her husband and was attached to his mother. Sometimes, she felt sad as she wasted her potential sitting at home. At that point, her husband suggested she help him since he was involved in many financial operations at the bank, and her analytical mind would be of great use. William quickly realized that Jessica did even better than he did, and soon he began openly exploiting her. When Jessica said she was tired from taking care of the elderly woman, her husband would manipulate her, reminding her that he was the family's only breadwinner and simply couldn't afford to lose his job. Despite her fatigue, Jessica would then do the financial calculations that required constant focus. Her efforts quickly paid off. William's boss, Benjamin Nelson, the bank's owner, noted that his subordinates' calculations and proposals increased the bank's profit. He even gave him a decent bonus for outstanding ideas and achievements, which William didn't mention to Jessica, spending it all on himself. He was intoxicated with such success. His salary increased, and at work, he was highly valued. William even began seriously thinking about a promotion, and since he had a low opinion of his wife, he decided to make a few independent proposals. "If Jessica managed it, I can do it too," he thought arrogantly. However, as soon as William showed his calculations to his boss, his face twisted. "What is this nonsense?" Benjamin frowned. "William, this doesn't look like you at all. If you're exhausted, maybe you should take a day off. I don't need employees bringing me this nonsense." And the results of his intellectual work went straight into the trash. After that, William never tried to do anything himself, always taking work home, and then bringing back interesting ideas and calculations that pleased his boss. When he was given the floor at meetings or asked to explain something, he immediately got nervous and started spouting nonsense, which surprised many. Jessica didn't see her husband until nearly 3 in the morning. By the time he made it to their room, he had destroyed everything in his path and was making noise. Even though his mother was heavily medicated, she woke up. As soon as Emily opened her eyes, she felt a sharp headache and her blood pressure rose. "Oh, Jessica, I feel unwell," she said in a weak voice. Her daughter-in-law immediately hovered over her with the necessary medication. When her mother-in-law's body started trembling, Jessica realized a seizure was beginning. She had gotten used to such situations and knew exactly what to do. "Breathe deeply," she instructed. "I'll give you a pill, and you'll feel better." A few moments later, her breathing evened out. The pain in her temples gradually faded, as did the tremors throughout her body. William, who had been watching them all this time, leaned clumsily against the door, then fell to the floor and started laughing loudly. Emily shook her head. In front of her lay her son, in whom she had invested all her soul. And her daughter-in-law, whom she hadn't liked at first, was now bustling around. Emily even felt guilty for the things she had said about Jessica years ago. "William, maybe you shouldn't rush," said his mother 5 years ago. "There are so many nice girls around. Maybe you should think it over? You can always get that stamp in your passport later." At one time, Emily had thought that Jessica was not the best choice for her son, but now she adored her and was grateful for her help and care. If it weren't for her daughter-in-law, they would have had to hire a caregiver, but the elderly woman didn't like letting strangers get close to her. William struggled to get up and glanced absent-mindedly at his mother and wife. Only now did he realize how much Emily had deteriorated recently. The room was filled with the sharp scent of medicine and the oppressive atmosphere of old age and illness, making him shudder. "Maybe we should send her to a nursing home," he said, not addressing anyone in particular. "My apartment has turned into a hospital." With those words, William shuffled off to the bedroom, knocking over a bedside table with flowers along the way. Jessica took a deep breath. "Maybe that really would be better for everyone," Emily said in a resigned voice. "Don't even think about it," her daughter-in-law quickly responded. "William is just drunk." "I'm sure he'll regret his words in the morning," she said, adding mentally, "if he even remembers them." "Oh, Jessica, I'm such a burden on you," her mother-in-law continued, lamenting. Because of her son's terrible behavior, Emily often fell into a melancholic mood, and Jessica had to comfort her, as her emotional state directly affected her physical health. And although there was much truth in her mother-in-law's words, Jessica always tried to cheer her up. "No, that's not true," Jessica tried to say with all sincerity. "I love spending time with you, because you're like a second mother to me." Jessica had lost her real mother at an early age. For a long time, there hadn't been a loving woman by her side who could offer advice or give warmth and care. Most of her conscious life, Jessica had to fend for herself. After marrying William, she began to see her mother in her mother-in-law. At first, their relationship was rather cold, as Emily didn't rush to open up to a stranger who had grown up without parents and, in her view, had a questionable past. But over time, Jessica won her over with her selfless kindness and care. For Jessica, the thought of sending her mother-in-law to a nursing home seemed wild. Her husband had spoken about it before, and each time, it made her angry. Can you believe he said that, especially in front of his mother? Jessica thought to herself. She already knew that when William got some rest and came to his senses, they would have a serious conversation. After finishing helping her mother-in-law, she returned to the bedroom. There, she was greeted by loud snoring and the suffocating smell of alcohol. She grimaced, realizing she wouldn't be able to sleep next to him. So, she gently opened the window to let in some fresh air and placed a bottle of mineral water by the bed, which would come in handy for William when he woke up. "My head," the man muttered, grabbing his temples. After a long night of drinking, he was hit by a terrible hangover. He immediately grabbed the glass by the bed and began drinking greedily. The series of persistent alarm clocks had woken him up, But William knew that today he definitely wasn't going anywhere. He called work, citing feeling unwell, and requested a day off. "I know what kind of bad health you're talking about," smirked the secretary, who had spent the entire evening with him yesterday. "We have a whole office full of such sufferers right now." "Stella, I'm feeling terrible," William said, dramatically sighing. "I haven't seen you all night, and now I'm suffering from longing. Can I come over to see you?" On the other end of the line, there was a loud laugh from a woman. "Come over, I'll be waiting," Catherine said coquettishly. At this, William triumphantly raised his hands and got into his car, anticipating a good day. Meanwhile, in the office, his boss was looking for him. "Stella, should I be expecting William today?" he asked, leaning on the secretary's desk. "Mr. Nelson, I was just about to tell you," she smiled. "William asked me to pass along that he took a sick day today." Nelson nodded. He wanted to discuss the bank's development plan for the next month with his employee, a plan that had been excellently drafted. William had done the work at home, and in written form, it was outstanding, but as soon as he started defending it at the meeting, Morrison couldn't string two words together. His boss found this strange and began to suspect that his employee was receiving outside help. Maybe he has a talented economist brother or a brilliant neighbor whose services he's using, his boss pondered. He had long lost faith in the intellectual abilities of his employee and would have fired him if it weren't for the fresh, excellent ideas William brought from somewhere. "Stella, do I have any meetings scheduled for today?" Nelson asked. "Yes," the secretary replied, looking at her computer. "Investors are coming at 6 p.m. today." "Great," the boss nodded, "then let everyone know that I won't be at the bank before that time." He had the idea to check on his subordinate himself by showing up unexpectedly at his home. Since Nelson kept personal files on each employee, he knew William's address, his marital status, and the health condition of his mother. Benjamin had already prepared a cover story, introducing himself as a colleague and close friend of William's. Jessica welcomed him warmly. "Please come in," she smiled. "We'll have tea in just a moment." Nelson immediately realized that William wasn't home, and most likely the sick leave was just a fabrication. "Thank you, I wouldn't mind," he replied politely. "To be honest, I was a bit surprised by your visit," Jessica said, placing the kettle on the stove, "since my husband is at work right now." Benjamin was ready for this. "Yes, your husband is a very valuable employee," he replied, taking a sip of his hot drink, "and, as far as I know, his 30th anniversary is coming up, so our team wants to give him a worthy gift, which is why I came to consult with you. After all, who knows a person better than their family?" "How wonderful!" Emily, who was also in the living room, said emotionally, "How lucky my son is to have such a wonderful friend." The elderly woman was delighted by the visit. She had been worried that her son's friends were alcoholics and suspicious characters, but this polite, decent man managed to convince her otherwise. Nelson immediately charmed her. "Oh, how wonderful it would be if William behaved like this," Emily thought dreamily. "William often talks about you," Benjamin continued, engaging the women in conversation, while carefully scanning the apartment, trying to catch sight of something or someone suspicious. "Really?" Jessica smirked. Her voice carried both surprise and a hint of bitterness, which didn't escape Nelson. He was good at reading people and quickly realized that Jessica was unhappy in her marriage, but he didn't focus on it, as he had come with a completely different purpose. Jessica seemed open and sociable, making her an interesting and comfortable person to talk to. However, no matter how many questions he asked her, he couldn't figure out if her husband had an assistant. "Oh, William forgot the documents," Jessica suddenly exclaimed. "One moment, I'll bring them to you." And that's when Benjamin had an unexpected thought, which he decided to test. As soon as Jessica handed him the papers, he frowned. "Is something wrong?" she immediately reacted. "Looks like there are a couple of mistakes in the calculations," Benjamin replied. "That can't be," Jessica immediately responded. "How do you know?" Nelson smirked. He had already gotten his answer. Her reaction was more telling than any words. "I saw how hard William worked," Jessica said, a little embarrassed. My husband spent so much time and effort on this work, he double-checked it several times. Who would have thought that our genius would be a young woman, the banker thought to himself. Well, maybe I'm wrong then. I'll try to check it again, Benjamin smiled. His initial surprise quickly turned to confusion. Jessica was truly a talented economist. He could swear to that because after this observation, he began asking her more professional questions, receiving excellent answers. It was intriguing. Why was she burying her potential? However, when Nelson glanced at Emily, who Jessica was now preparing medicine for, all his questions disappeared. Suddenly, a wave of anger rose in him toward William, who had forced his wife to take care of his sick mother and forget about her talent. His fists clenched in frustration. He felt even more disdain for his subordinate. Has your husband ever mentioned that we need employees in the office? Benjamin suddenly asked. No, Jessica shook her head. William doesn't like to talk about work at home. You know, it seems to me that you would be perfect for the position of a financial analyst, Benjamin continued his advance. At these words, Jessica's heart began to beat faster. She remembered how, several years ago, she had worked at a financial firm and dreamed of reaching this position, but had been forced to leave. For a moment, she even brightened up. In fact, for this vacancy, they're looking for a woman, Benjamin continued. Would you like to give it a try? I think your candidacy would be highly regarded. I would love to, Jessica said dreamily. At that moment, Emily started coughing violently, and her daughter-in-law had to return to the harsh reality. What job, Jessica? What will William say? And what about Emily? Who will take care of her then? 100 persistent questions raced through her mind. But I'll have to decline, she added with regret. I have too many household duties. Jessica looked at the elderly woman. Nelson nodded, pressing his lips together. More than anything, he didn't want to let such a brilliant candidate slip away, but he couldn't insist. Jessica had to agree on her own. Still, I advise you to think carefully, Benjamin smiled. Soon he left, and Jessica was left in deep thought. Of course, she wasn't ready to leave the house and go to work, but thoughts of self-realization started filling her mind, making her agonize over missed opportunities. The banker, however, wasn't ready to accept rejection. He wanted to get this gem for his company, and his plan started to form almost immediately. The next day, he came to the office earlier than usual. Stella, as soon as Morrison arrives, ask him to come to my office, the boss instructed. As soon as William stepped through the door, the secretary passed on the message. Why? William immediately got nervous. What does he want from me? But Stella just shrugged, signaling that he would find out soon enough. And what mood was he in? William continued. The usual one. The secretary was starting to get annoyed. Just go already. William went to see the boss, still guessing why he had been called. As soon as he approached Nelson's desk, the same report Jessica had handed him landed in front of him. William frowned. He clearly remembered not bringing those papers from home. What, did you think you could fool me? The boss squinted, carefully studying his subordinate. Yes, you were quite skilled at passing off your wife's accomplishments as your own, but this can't continue. But how? William managed to squeeze out, stunned. Did Jessica tell him everything? He wondered, already anticipating a confrontation at home later. It doesn't matter, the boss waved it off. I have an offer for you. Starting tomorrow, Jessica will take your position, and you can take care of your sick mother. Otherwise, I'll fire you. For several minutes, William stood there, lost in thought, trying to process what he had just heard. I agree, he said, bewildered. Good, smiled the boss. I won't keep you any longer. William left Nelson's office on unsteady legs. When Stella asked him about it, he just waved her off and kept walking. To Jessica and Emily's surprise, William returned from work much earlier today, at lunchtime. Why aren't you at work? His wife asked. Shouldn't you know that? He snapped. It was clear from his demeanor that he was very unhappy about something. "William, I don't understand," Jessica said anxiously. "Explain, what happened?" Then her husband, raising his voice, recounted his conversation with the boss. Jessica just blinked, trying to comprehend what she had heard. She didn't mention that his colleague had visited them yesterday, but she was sure that he was the one who helped bring about this turn of events. Jessica couldn't contain her happy smile. "Why are you grinning?" William got even angrier. "You planned this, didn't you? Wanted me fired? If I had known this would happen, I would never have asked you for help." "Yeah, and then you would have been fired even earlier," his wife thought to herself, but she said something entirely different. "I don't know how it happened," Jessica replied calmly. "I didn't set you up. But if your boss wants me to work for him, then that's what will happen. You did say we need the money." William didn't argue with that, though he was very displeased with how things had turned out. However, financially, he was winning because his salary remained the same while Jessica would start earning her own. This way, their family budget would double. However, when William looked at his helpless mother, who had started coughing terribly again, his mood darkened. The prospect of taking care of her didn't excite him at all. He seriously thought about hiring someone else to take his place. Jessica awaited the next day with great anticipation. She spent a lot of time in front of the mirror, carefully choosing an outfit. She wanted to look fresh and professional, just like the other employees at the bank. The next day, she arrived at work at the appointed time. She was greeted by none other than Benjamin, whom she still saw as a colleague and a friend of her husband. "Good morning, Benjamin," she smiled. The secretary nearby almost choked at such boldness and familiarity, but Nelson wasn't bothered in the slightest. In fact, he found it amusing since he had created this whole story. "Good morning," he smiled back. "Let's go, we need to discuss some details." When the boss confessed everything to her, Jessica's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She spoke so casually with her superior that she felt uneasy. "But why should I feel bad?" He started at first, her inner voice told her, and she managed to calm down a bit. "I owe you an apology for this charade," Benjamin said. "But I couldn't work with your husband anymore. I needed you. I value my bank's reputation, and changes were necessary." Jessica nodded in understanding. They then discussed the same report that Benjamin had liked. Finally, he was able to get sensible answers to all his questions. He then asked her to present everything to the rest of the staff so they could map out a plan of action. "I'll prepare the presentation and can present it," Jessica answered readily. "Excellent, go ahead," the boss instructed. Today's meeting was a true triumph for Jessica. Despite it being only her first working day, she was able to clearly outline the goals of their bank and even made several useful suggestions aimed at development. She even had to engage in a discussion with a more senior and experienced analyst, but Morrison stood her ground with dignity, convincing her colleague and immediately earning the respect of the team. "That was very good," Benjamin remarked at the end of the day. "Keep up the great work." Jessica felt like she was walking on air on her way home. Finally, she felt that she was in the right place, doing what she was meant to do. When she returned home, she found Emily alone. "Where's William?" "I don't know, Jessica," sighed the elderly woman. "He left earlier today." Jessica's eyes widened. "Emily, have you eaten today? Did you take your medicine?" She immediately started asking her mother-in-law. But the elderly woman only lowered her head sadly. Everything was clear. Jessica shook her head, growing even more disappointed in her husband. Despite being completely exhausted after a long workday, she found the strength to make dinner and spend some time with her mother-in-law to distract her from sad thoughts. By the end of the day, she literally collapsed into bed and fell asleep instantly, completely forgetting that her husband still hadn't returned. Though Jessica had worked at the bank for just a couple of days, there was already a sense of excitement in the air, as though this financial machine had received a new impulse and was ready to move even faster. Nelson was extremely pleased, as now he had the opportunity to work directly with a talented economist, instead of through his foolish husband. In the midst of another meeting, Jessica's phone rang. Since it was always on silent, it didn't disturb anyone. The caller ID was unfamiliar, and she never answered such calls, fearing scammers, but something about this one made her uneasy, and she felt compelled to answer. She excused herself and stepped into the hallway. Jessica Morrison, a mechanical female voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is the emergency services. Your mother-in-law has had a seizure. We are taking her to the hospital." The medical worker then provided the address. "I'll be there," Jessica breathed out. When the call ended, she grabbed her head, trembling. What she feared the most had happened. She felt betrayed by her husband. The moment she left Emily alone, she had been taken to the hospital. Benjamin, sensing that something was wrong, followed her out into the hallway. "Is everything okay?" he frowned. "No," Jessica replied, her voice cracking, then she recounted the conversation with the doctor. "You can go, I'll cover for you," Nelson said confidently, taking the papers from her hands, "and you can use my driver, it will be faster." Grateful, Jessica rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding wildly. She also felt guilty. When she arrived, she was told the prognosis was not good. "Your mother-in-law is in intensive care," the doctor said. "We're doing everything we can to save her, so please wait." Hugging herself, Jessica sat on the bench and waited. It was so agonizing, she couldn't calm down. And what could be worse than waiting, especially when it had to be endured alone? Jessica barely put the phone down, calling her husband every minute because he needed to know what was happening with his mother. "What a pig you are, William," she exclaimed in frustration when, once again, she was told the number was temporarily unavailable. William had deliberately turned off his phone to avoid being disturbed. He had a new obsession now, named Catherine. This young but very outgoing waitress was constantly on his mind. William spent all his free time with his lover, time he now had plenty of, and didn't even think about his mother or his wife. At some point, Jessica grew tired of it. In a fit of anger, she threw the phone on the floor. "God, what a fool I am," she groaned, looking at the shattered screen. Jessica tried to breathe deeply, attempting to calm herself. She had already been in the hospital for several hours, but still hadn't received any updates. Only closer to the evening did a doctor come to speak to her. "Everything is fine," he said, tiredly smiling. "The operation was successful. Your mother-in-law is sleeping now." Jessica let out a loud sigh of relief. "Can I see her?" she asked. "Now is not the best time. It's better to come tomorrow," the doctor recommended. "I understand. I promise I won't disturb her, but just to look through the glass," the daughter-in-law insisted. The doctor agreed and led her to see Emily. Jessica was able to look at the elderly woman, who lay with her eyes closed, multiple wires attached to her body. This sight triggered a new wave of anxiety. She had never seen the woman in such a state. Jessica returned home very late and, to her great surprise, found her boss standing by the door. "Mr. Nelson?" Jessica exclaimed, wide-eyed. "What are you doing here?" Judging by his appearance, he had been standing there for quite some time. "You weren't answering my calls," Nelson explained. "I decided to come and find out how your mother-in-law is doing." Jessica sighed deeply, taking her broken phone out of her pocket. "Sorry, I didn't hear," she said sarcastically. "What happened?" He frowned. "Nothing special, just a nervous breakdown." Jessica waved it off, then let him inside. Once they were in the living room, she made tea and told him everything that had happened at the hospital. She didn't hide her doubts about her work situation either. "Sometimes I wonder if, had I not gone to see you, things would be fine with her," Jessica said candidly. "I think I may have rushed into it." "Don't you dare blame yourself," Nelson replied sharply. "You're doing what you're best at. Shouldn't it be William taking care of his own mother?" When the conversation turned to her husband, she simply waved her hand. "No, I can't leave Emily anymore," Jessica declared stubbornly, lowering her head. "Sorry for letting you down, but I can't do otherwise. If things had ended badly today, I would never have forgiven myself." For a moment, a heavy silence hung between them. They each thought about their own troubles. Jessica couldn't stop blaming herself for what happened, while her boss tried to figure out how not to lose such a valuable employee. "There's a very good center," Benjamin said. "It has highly qualified doctors and caregivers. I'm sure your mother-in-law will get excellent care there, and then you could continue working." The plan was perfect, if not for the financial issue. Jessica just shook her head. "I'm afraid we can't afford it," she sighed. Benjamin almost choked with outrage. "It's not about your finances," he said. "Of course, I'll cover all the expenses," the banker declared. "What?" Jessica immediately reacted. "I can't accept that." He sighed and approached her, gently putting his arm around her shoulders. "But you must," he said, his tone leaving no room for disagreement. "It's the only way you can stay at the bank. And I'm not going to lose you." In the end, when Emily was able to recover, she was moved to a care center. They gave her a private room and assigned a nurse and caregiver to monitor her condition hourly. She also attended immune-boosting procedures. Jessica continued to work for Nelson. When she arrived at the office, she found a small box tied with a white ribbon on her desk. Inside was a phone, and a note was attached: "You must always be available." At that moment, her cheeks flushed, and a happy smile appeared on her face. If it hadn't been for Benjamin, she would have lost all hope. Jessica made sure to call her mother-in-law every day and visit her. Although the care was good, Emily still felt lonely, missing her daughter-in-law, who she considered her own daughter. "Why are you making yourself suffer like this?" Jessica said over the phone. "You need to get better, and yet you're so negative." "Oh, Jessica." Emily sighed. "It's hard with strangers. I understand they're doctors, but I'm just so used to you." "Then I'll come visit you after work today," Jessica promised. When she saw her, Emily cheered up a little. By that time, William had been informed of his mother's condition, but he greeted the news indifferently and never visited her. When Jessica found out, she was so furious that she almost called him to express everything she thought about him. Emily understood everything. "I didn't turn out to be a good mother," she shook her head. Jessica couldn't think of anything to say to that, simply squeezing her wrinkled hand in a gesture of support. Finally, the realization hit Jessica. She understood that things couldn't continue like this anymore. The next day, she filed for divorce. She had no desire to call William, as he had been ignoring her lately. He'll get the divorce notification anyway, and that's when he'll find out, she thought. William was furious when he heard the news. It was, first and foremost, a blow to his ego, as he had thought he would be the one to leave Jessica, but now it was the other way around. Since William still had access to the bank account at home, he was able to go there without any problems and cause a scene. "Who do you think you are? Have you seen yourself? I'm the one who's divorcing you, got it?" he yelled. Jessica was stunned. She didn't know how to react to such irrational behavior. She just stood there in shock. Gradually, curious onlookers started gathering around them. She felt embarrassed. "William, stop," she said, glancing around nervously. "Why are you making a scene? I want everyone to know what a bitch you are. You played me, took my place, and now you filed for divorce," her offended husband continued, ranting. Soon, the yelling attracted the attention of the boss. "What do you think you're doing?" Nelson started, advancing toward William. "And how dare you talk to a woman like that, especially your wife?" Benjamin called for security. "I don't give a damn." William snapped. "I'm quitting. Have a nice time in this hellhole." When he was finally escorted out and his colleagues went back to their business, Jessica sank into a chair, clutching her head. She was incredibly ashamed. The boss approached and gently touched her wrist. "Don't worry," he said soothingly. "You're not responsible for his behavior." Jessica nodded gratefully, appreciating the support. With her husband's departure, the bank entered a tough period. All the indicators dropped lower every day. partners inexplicably started severing ties, and the staff count gradually shrank. Nelson couldn't understand what was happening. He spent late hours in his office, checking reports, trying to figure it out, but nothing worked. As a result, he became extremely stressed and began lashing out at his subordinates. "I can't take it anymore," Stella suddenly exclaimed. "I'm quitting." Another rat abandoning the sinking ship, Jessica thought to herself. Due to the bank's significantly reduced profits, Nelson could barely pay the staff. As a result, they flocked to competitors who welcomed them with open arms. Slowly, Jessica noticed the disappearance of important passwords and secret codes. It turned out that when her husband left, he had taken the information with him, and the competitors used it. Now Nelson's bank was rapidly heading toward bankruptcy. Morrison had been gathering compromising material on his boss for a while. Due to his numerous mistakes at work, he had expected to be fired and had been preparing for that event. Jessica's situation wasn't much better. She had divorced her husband, but he managed to hire a good lawyer. It only took one hearing for him to get her evicted from the apartment. No matter how hard she tried to prove she had invested a lot in it, it didn't work. "You have exactly 24 hours to move out of my house," William said mockingly. "Otherwise, all your stuff will be thrown out the window." "What a worthless piece of trash you are," his ex-wife grimaced. "What was I even thinking when I married him? How did I ever see a man in him?" Jessica thought as she packed her things. She found herself in a difficult situation. She had no money to rent a place. No relatives or close friends to stay with either. So, Jessica came up with the idea to move into the office. Given that the number of employees had dropped significantly recently, it was possible. Even at night, she thought about how to save the bank and restore its reputation. The worst part was that the captain of the ship, Benjamin, had started losing hope of fixing anything. She noticed how his spirit kept sinking more and more. In the early days, the boss had desperately tried to do something, but now, he sometimes didn't even show up at the bank. By chance, Jessica overheard one of his phone conversations. "I understand," he sighed tiredly. "But I can't come earlier. I need to work, otherwise, I'll lose everything." The tone of the conversation made her tense, and she involuntarily listened more closely. "Be stricter with the boys. I don't want them to keep taking advantage of everyone," Nelson added, then hung up. Due to an awkward movement, Jessica knocked over a nearby flower pot, and it tumbled across the floor, revealing her presence. "Sorry," she mumbled. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop, it just happened." But Benjamin didn't care. He had so many problems on his mind that this innocent episode was the least of his concerns. He didn't want to be alone and suggested they have tea together, which she agreed to. She was also struggling, and she was happy to listen to someone else, as well as vent and lighten her soul. Nelson told her that he was raising 2 sons on his own, twins who were 7 years old. Recently, they had constant conflicts, and the boys would get upset and refuse to talk to him. Benjamin felt like a terrible father, torn between his children and his failing business. He had just spoken to their nanny, who complained about the boys' bad behavior. "Where's their mother?" Jessica asked. "She left us a few years ago. Ran off with my competitor to live in France," Nelson said plainly, and Jessica could only sigh in response. They sat in silence for a while, and then the banker spoke again. "I need to be honest with you," Benjamin said, after the tea had cooled. "Things are bad. You probably understand that already, so I don't want to keep you. If you decide to leave, I'll understand. With your skills, you can easily find another good job." But instead of running away from the sinking ship, Jessica took his hand and spoke warmly. "Not a chance. I'm staying with you, and we'll fix everything." Now it was her turn to support him. For a moment, Benjamin's eyes lit up. He saw not just a talented economist, but a strong, brave woman who was loyal to him. Her belief in the best gave him strength, preventing him from giving up. "Maybe you're right," Nelson whispered, squeezing her hand in response. "Maybe there's still a reason to fight." While they were desperately trying to resist fate and prevent the bank from collapsing, her former mother-in-law, on the other hand, was giving up. Despite her health improving, Emily's mental state remained heavy. She was in the final stages of melancholy, reflecting on her life and coming to the sad realization that she had never truly fulfilled herself. She was deeply saddened by her son, into whom she had poured all her strength, and now she was undeserving of even his slightest attention. Each day, she lost more and more of her will to live. On the first day of winter, when the bitter cold set in, Emily had a seizure. Half an hour later, she passed away. Jessica was immediately informed. No, was all her daughter-in-law could say before tears began to choke her. But she was doing okay. She had a breakdown right at work. Benjamin, who was nearby, immediately embraced her, offering support. Jessica clung to him as if he were a lifeline. She felt like if she let go, she'd surely faint. When she finally arrived at the hospital to take care of the funeral arrangements, a young nurse came up to her and handed her a note. "Emily Morrison asked me to give this to you when she's gone," the nurse said, offering her condolences before leaving. Frowning, Jessica started reading. In the note, her former mother-in-law expressed her regret that she had no property to leave her children, so she had not seen the point of using a notary and had decided to write everything in this letter. Emily mentioned a jewelry box she had hidden out in the country, at the site where her childhood home once stood, the place where she had been born and raised. The elderly woman wanted these jewels to belong to Jessica after her death. "I'll never be able to thank you for everything you've done for me, but I hope this jewelry box might help you someday." After finishing the note, Jessica felt mixed emotions. On one hand, she was overcome with deep sorrow for the woman she had considered her mother, but on the other hand, the inheritance might just help her now. Without wasting a moment, Jessica went to the address. It took her half the day to find the box, but she had no regrets. As soon as she arrived at the old house, her heart squeezed. Time had erased everything, leaving only ruins of the once lively home where everyone had been happy. It was no wonder Emily had remembered it with such warmth. Finding the box wasn't difficult. It was hidden behind the house under a tree. Jessica carefully covered it with cloth and placed it in her bag. She knew exactly what to do next. A few days later, Benjamin was faced with a stack of money, and he looked up at Jessica in surprise. "What is this?" "This is our chance to start over," Jessica smiled, her eyes sparkling with triumph. She had decided to sell part of the jewelry to keep the bank from going bankrupt. The inheritance left by her mother-in-law was so significant that it covered all the losses and still left funds for further development. "No, I can't accept this," Benjamin said, holding up his hand. "But you must," Jessica said, repeating his words from a few months ago. Thanks to this money, Benjamin and Jessica had the resources to fight back against their competitors. They were able to pay off all their debts and also attract new investors. Gradually, things began to improve. Within weeks, they were able to hire new staff. Many of the former employees who had left wanted to return, but Nelson firmly rejected them, believing that those who had betrayed him once would do it again. Jessica agreed with him. In the first month after the bank's reorganization, they managed to show a profit. At that point, Jessica was appointed deputy to Benjamin, though it was just a title. In reality, they became partners, working together on everything. They formed an incredible team, not only professionally but personally as well. The spark that had ignited on their first meeting grew even stronger. Both Benjamin and Jessica had long felt the attraction between them, but there were so many obstacles between them that they couldn't allow themselves to act on it. However, they were always there for each other, providing support. 6 months later, they had taken the bank to a new level, and it became even more successful than before. "I guess to rise high, you first need to fall hard," Benjamin remarked after it became clear that they had multiplied their profits. Gradually, Jessica's life began to come into balance. She had transformed from a miserable housewife into not just a successful woman but one who was loved. She never forgot who she owed everything to. The grateful daughter-in-law often visited her mother-in-law's grave, bringing her favorite white roses and sharing everything that was happening. "I miss our talk so much," Jessica would say, sitting on the bench. As soon as they had managed to stabilize the bank, the first thing she spent her bonus on was a tombstone for Emily. She loved her and wanted to show her appreciation. Jessica visited the grave every week, and one day she was surprised to find an unexpected guest there. It was William, though it was hard to recognize him. Gaunt, unshaven, pale, he had become a shadow of himself. As she got closer, she heard him crying. His entire appearance reminded her of a beaten, unwanted dog. "William?" Jessica asked quietly, unable to believe her eyes. He immediately turned toward her and wiped away his tears. "Yes, it's me. Sometimes I can't stand to look at my reflection, but it is what it is." It was clear that he had hit rock bottom. He had no one to turn to for help or to talk to, and so he came to his mother's grave, the only person who had always loved him. At that moment, Benjamin appeared, as he always picked Jessica up from the cemetery. Seeing her ex-husband did not please Nelson at all. "And what is he doing here?" the banker frowned. William realized that there was no chance of repairing his relationship with Jessica, especially since there was already another man by her side. He then began begging to be reinstated at work. However, the former boss remained unyielding. "No second chances," he said firmly, then took Jessica by the hand and walked toward the car. But Jessica wasn't as firm. She felt sorry for William and even decided to give him half of the inheritance. After all, that jewelry box had belonged to his mother, and it seemed that William had every right to it. "Are you sure?" Benjamin asked, not understanding her altruism. "After everything he did to you, and to his mother as well. Are you really ready to forgive and help him?" Unlike her husband, Jessica knew how to forgive. She genuinely decided to give part of the jewelry to her ex-husband. First and foremost, because she felt it was the right thing to do. "Thank you," William said gratefully. "Now everything will be different. I've changed, I understand everything, and I won't make the same mistakes again to end up at rock bottom." William had indeed reevaluated his life during this time. He realized how terribly he had treated the people closest to him. His conscience tortured him, and he couldn't sleep at night. In search of comfort, he went to church. At first, he just prayed and spoke to the priest, but then he decided to stay there forever, getting a job and a small room. He also donated money to a charity fund. In doing so, he hoped to atone for his sins before his late mother. "I don't need anything anymore," he said, referring to material possessions. "I just want peace." A few months later, Jessica married Benjamin. She became a wonderful mother to the two mischievous twins, who adored her from the very first day. Their father had been worried that there might be problems, as he had been struggling to manage them lately, but fortunately, everything went well. Jessica surrounded them with the love and care the boys had been missing. "It's that simple," Jessica smiled. 6 months after their marriage, Jessica found out she was pregnant. It was such a surprise because she had never expected to become a mother. She was perfectly content raising her husband's children from his first marriage, but this pregnancy made everyone incredibly happy. "I think it's going to be a girl," Benjamin said one day, gently rubbing his wife's belly. "You want a daughter?" Jessica smiled, not caring at all about the baby's gender. She just wanted the baby to be healthy. "Yes," her husband confessed. "She'll be as beautiful, strong, and smart as her mother." Maybe it was a premonition or a strong desire on Benjamin's part, but a few weeks later, when the Nelsons went for an ultrasound to find out the baby's gender, they were thrilled to learn it was a girl. In that moment, they felt like the happiest people in the world.